William is the head of the African Union's ECOSOCC Secretariat. William has more than 20 years of experience of international development in international and local NGOs in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, in Ghana, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Thailand, in the Ivory Coast, in Ethiopia, in Zambia. Apart from just working for the AU as head of the ECOSOCC Secretariat, he has a deep understanding of high-level setup and operationalization of the ECOSOCC Secretariat, and is currently leading a 27-person team in the implementation of related action plans, programs, and activities of the Secretariat and those of sectoral cluster committees of ECOSOCC. William, thank you very much for making the time, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I am loud and clear. Hello?
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. Let me take this opportunity to extend greetings from African civil society organizations, grassroots movement, communities across our great continent who are basically joining us on this dialogue today. And I also want to add on the perspective that has been shared by my senior colleague, Brian Carew, on the question which we are gathered here to address, which is quite a tricky one, which is, will South Africa's G20 be a G20 on the African continent or an African G20? Some might see it as a play on words, a subtle distinction between, without real difference in my view. But let me be clear from the outset. This distinction is everything. It is the difference between Africa as a mere spectator and Africa as an architect. For me, it is the difference between repeating history and making history. Let us be clear, colleagues. A G20 on the African continent will be business as usual. It will mean the world's most powerful economies flying into Johannesburg, holding their meetings, issuing their communiques, and departing while Africa remains what I would call a backdrop, a venue, perhaps even a topic of discussion, but never truly a driver of decisions, which Brian was talking about. Our concern would or might be acknowledged in paragraphs carefully crafted to sound inclusive, while the real architecture of global economic governance continues unchanged, indifferent to our realities. This is a pattern Africa knows too well. How many times have decisions about Africa debt been made in rooms where Africans were not present? How many times have trade rules that disadvantage our industries been written without our input? How many times have we been told what is good for us by those who have never walked in our shoes? An Africa G20 is something entirely different. An Africa G20 means that Africa's priorities shape the agenda. It means our voices are not just heard, but heeded too. It means that when we speak about debt relief, it is not charity we seek, but justice that we demand. When we speak about climate finance, we speak as contributors to global climate solution, not as beggars. When we speak about reforming international financial institutions, we speak with the authority of a continent that has subsidized the development of others for far too long. So which kind of G20 are we witnessing under South Africa's presidency? Let me share with you why the institution I work for, ECOSOCC, that represents civil society, believes we are seeing the emergence of an authentically African G20. First and foremost, South Africa has approached this presidency with continental consciousness. This has not been a solo performance that we used to see in certain instances. The South African government has consulted extensively with its peers, the African Union, and other key stakeholders, and the involvement of other stakeholders, and that is the reason why we are having this conversation today. At the level of the African Union, South Africa's G20 presidency, it is a matter of great pride. When South Africa speaks at the G20, it carries not just a national position, but a continental mandate. This Africa speaking through South Africa, not South Africa speaking for Africa. For its G20 presidency, it is important to note that South Africa has prioritized so many key issues which you all are aware of: inclusive economic growth, sustainable development financing, reform of international financial institutions. These are not abstract global issues that coincidentally affect Africa. These are Africa's issues. These are structural barriers that have held us back for decades. So by placing them at the center of the G20 agenda, South Africa is saying Africa's development challenges are global governance challenges, and they will no longer be pushed to the margins. You all will agree, and I think Brian also mentioned, South Africa made us all proud with the resounding Waka Waka in 2010. We can feel the same passion, the same sense of pride with South Africa bringing home the G20. But this time, South Africa has worked to leverage and strengthen the African Union's permanent membership in the G20, which we achieved in 2023. It is crucial. It means that Africa is represented not just through individual member states, but as a continental bloc with collective voice and institutional weight. In fact, the G20, in my view, is no longer the 19 countries plus the European Union. I said the G20, it now includes Africa's 1.4 billion people speaking with one voice. So South Africa is championing Africa solutions, not just highlighting African problems. Let's take, for instance, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, innovative financing mechanism designed by Africans for African realities. These are solutions being elevated. So we are not asking the world to solve our challenges. We are asking the world to support the solutions we already design. These are not small achievements. These are fundamental shifts in how Africa engages with global economic governance. But let's be honest with ourselves. For an effective Africa G20, we need concrete deliverables, not beautiful declarations like Brian said. We need actual reforms to IMF quotas and voting structure. We need debt relief mechanisms that work for our economies, not just creditors. We need climate finance that matches both our needs and our contribution to global solution. We need trade frameworks that support African industrialization, not permanent raw material export. African states and civil society must come together to build a mechanism to sustain Africa's voice in the G20 beyond South Africa's presidency. This, in my view, means capacity building for African negotiators, strengthening institutional relationship between the African Union and the G20, and prepare the ground for future African G20 presidencies. This cannot be a one-time moment. It must be the beginning of Africa's permanent elevation in global economic governance. Will this G20 deliver structural reform to global economic governance? Will Africa concerns about debt trade, climate, and representation be addressed with the urgency they deserve? Will we look back on this moment as the time when Africa finally moved from the margins to the center of global economic decision-making? I believe we can, but only if we remain united. Only if we continue demanding that this be an Africa G20, not merely a G20 that happens to be in Africa. Only if we refuse to settle for symbolic inclusion when we deserve substantive power. I think because of time, I will want to stop here, but I want to say Africa's time is not coming. Africa's time is now. It is time for Africa. And therefore, all of us need to come together to see how we can make South Africa G20 a remarkable one. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our continued dialogue, especially from the civil society perspective, so that we see civil society providing input and perspective into this discussion. Thank you for the time given to me.